1944, the Japanese Empire has a plan to win the war. It's simple, brutal, and based on centuries of samurai tradition. They will build invincible fortresses on the outer islands of the Pacific. They will fill them with thousands of troops, massive coastal guns, and bunkers of concrete and steel. They will lure the Americans into attacking these strongholds, bleeding them white in a series of gruesome frontal assaults. They believe the Americans are arrogant and predictable. They believe the U.S. Navy will have no choice but to smash itself against these walls. But what if there's a third option they never considered? Admiral Chester Nimitz, the American commander, looks at the map. His staff expects him to point to the fortresses, to the obvious targets bristling with guns and troops. Instead, he asks a question the Japanese never expected. Why should we attack them at all? For more untold World War II stories like this, make sure to subscribe. This is the story of how the U.S. Navy defeated Japan's greatest fortresses, not by destroying them but by ignoring them. It is the story of a 4-day battle that didn't just kill soldiers. It killed an entire philosophy of war. The Japanese strategy is called the Z-Plan. It's a doctrine of the decisive battle, a concept burned into Japanese military thinking since the days of the samurai. They want a repeat of Tarawa, where 1,000 Marines died for a tiny strip of coral. Where American bodies piled up on beaches. Where victory was measured in blood, not strategy. They've fortified islands like Kwajalein and Mili in the Marshalls, turning them into meat grinders. Concrete bunkers 10 feet thick. Artillery positions carved into volcanic rock. Machine gun nests covering every inch of beach. Admiral Mainichi Koga, the Japanese commander, is confident. He briefs his staff with absolute certainty. The American mind is methodical. They lack imagination. It will strike where we are strongest. But what happens when your enemy refuses to be predictable? He is wrong, catastrophically wrong. American intelligence has cracked the Japanese codes. They know exactly where the Japanese are strong, and more importantly, they know where they are weak. Nimitz gathers his admirals in Pearl Harbor. The room is thick with cigarette smoke and tension. On the wall, a massive map of the Marshall Islands. His staff expects him to point to the fortresses, Kwajalein, Mili, Wat. The obvious targets, he doesn't. He points to the center of the cluster, Kwajalein Atoll. It's the administrative hub, the nerve center, the logistics headquarters for the entire Japanese defense network in the Marshalls. And because it sits behind the shield of the outer fortresses, because the Japanese believe it's protected, it's shockingly undefended. Out of 5,000 personnel stationed there, only 1,200 are actual combat troops. The rest. Cooks, clerks, construction workers, mechanics, support staff who never expected to see combat. Nimitz's order is simple and terrifying. We are not going to Kwajalein, we are not going to Mili, we are going straight to Kwajalein. The room goes silent. Some admirals look confused, others look skeptical. One speaks up. Sir, that's the center of their defensive network. We'd be sailing past fortified islands on both sides. Nimitz smiles. Exactly. The Americans launch a masterclass in deception. Carrier groups hammer the outer fortresses for weeks. They bomb the runways, they shell the beaches. They launch feint attacks that look like invasion rehearsals. To the Japanese, this looks exactly like the softening up phase before an invasion, the preparatory bombardment before the main assault, and they congratulate themselves. See, the Japanese commanders tell each other. The Americans are doing exactly what we predicted. They are methodical, predictable. They will attack our strongest positions. They reinforce the outer islands. They move troops. They position their naval forces to intercept the American fleet when it commits to the assault on the fortresses. But it's all smoke and mirrors. What the Japanese don't realize is that they're watching a magic trick, and they're looking at the wrong hand. On January 30th, 1944, the Japanese commanders on Kwajalein wake up to a nightmare. The horizon isn't empty. It's filled with the silhouettes of the greatest armada ever assembled. 7 battleships, 11 carriers, hundreds of transports carrying 40,000 troops, and they're not attacking the outer islands. They've sailed right past them. They're inside the lagoon, behind the defensive perimeter, in the one place the Japanese never thought they needed to defend. Admiral Monzo Akiyama watches from his command bunker as 14-inch shells from the USS New Mexico and USS Mississippi begin to turn his headquarters into dust. The massive coastal guns he's positioned, useless. They're all facing the ocean, facing the wrong direction. The enemy is behind him. He reaches for his diary with trembling hands and writes words that will haunt Japanese military doctrine for generations. Our doctrine has failed. The enemy does not honor the rules. They fight a different war. But how do you fight an enemy who refuses to play the game you've designed? The assault is overwhelming. The Americans don't just land. They swarm. On Kwajalein Island, the bombardment is so intense it erases the island's features. Trees that have stood for centuries are reduced to splinters in minutes. Bunkers built to withstand direct hits are cracked open like eggs. The sound is indescribable, a continuous roar of explosions that drowns out human voices, that makes the ground shake like an earthquake. When the infantry hits the beaches, resistance is desperate, futile, almost medieval in its intensity. The Japanese defenders, cooks handed rifles, clerks given grenades, construction workers transformed into soldiers, fight with suicidal bravery. But bravery alone cannot stop tanks, cannot stop flamethrowers, cannot stop an industrial war machine that has crossed an ocean to destroy you. They charge American positions with bayonets. They detonate grenades against tank treads. They fight from rubble piles with broken weapons until the very end, and they are annihilated. Within 4 days, it's over. The heart of the Japanese defense in the marshals has been ripped out. Nearly 8,500 Japanese defenders are killed. The American losses, fewer than 400 dead. It isn't a battle. It's a demolition. One American officer will later write, "We didn't conquer Kwajalein, we erased it." But here's where the true brilliance of the strategy reveals itself. The real victory isn't what happened at Kwajalein. It's what happened to the islands the Americans didn't attack. Think about it from the Japanese perspective. On the fortress islands of WW2 Mysteries and WW2I, thousands of elite Japanese troops wait for an attack that never comes. These are the best soldiers Japan has. Veterans of China. Men trained for years in the art of defensive warfare. They're manning massive guns, ready to die for the emperor, ready to turn the beaches red with American blood. They stand by their artillery pieces, scanning the horizon, day after day, week after week. But the ships never appear. Instead, they see something worse. They see American convoys sailing safely past them, just out of range. Ships laden with supplies, with troops, with equipment, heading to Kwajalein. Heading deeper into the Pacific, going around them, ignoring them. They realize with dawning horror that they haven't been defeated in battle. They've been made irrelevant. They're cut off. No food shipments, no ammunition resupply, no orders from headquarters because headquarters no longer exists. The Americans don't need to kill them, they just let them rot. Can you imagine the psychological torture? You're a soldier. You've trained your entire life for combat. You've built an impregnable fortress. You're ready to die gloriously defending it. And then, nothing. The enemy just walks around you. The invincible fortresses become open-air prisons. Thousands of men begin to starve to death, guarding beaches no one wants, maintaining guns that will never fire, defending positions that have no strategic value. One Japanese soldier on Millie will later write in his diary, "We are samurai guarding an empty castle. The war has moved on without us." This is the new American way of war, island hopping. Don't attack strength, attack weakness. Turn the enemy's greatest assets into liabilities. Let them pour resources into positions you'll never assault. Let them waste their best troops on islands you'll never invade. It's not about destroying the enemy, it's about making them irrelevant. For the Japanese high command, the shock is total, existential. They had prepared for a boxing match. The Americans brought a gun. They had built a strategy around honor, around decisive battle, around forcing the enemy to fight on their terms. But what do you do when the enemy simply refuses? How do you fight an enemy who won't play by your rules? How do you defend a fortress when the enemy just walks around it? The psychological blow is devastating. It's not just a military defeat, it's a philosophical one. Everything the Japanese military has believed about warfare, about the decisive battle, about the importance of strong defensive positions, about forcing the enemy to bleed, is suddenly obsolete. Kwajalein isn't just a victory, it's the end of an era. The age of the static fortress is dead. The age of maneuver warfare has begun, and 40,000 Japanese soldiers are left to wither on the vine, defeated not by American firepower, but by American imagination. Defeated by a general who was smart enough not to fight. Chester Nimitz understood something profound that day in Pearl Harbor when he pointed to the map. War isn't about destroying every enemy position. It's about achieving your objectives with minimum cost. The Japanese wanted a glorious battle. Nimitz gave them irrelevance. They wanted to die as warriors. He let them die as forgotten men. They wanted to write their names in history with blood. He simply moved on. In the months that followed, this strategy would be repeated again and again across the Pacific. Rabaul bypassed, Truk bypassed, fortress after fortress left to rot. The Japanese would lose not because they couldn't fight, but because they were fighting a war that no longer existed. And it all started with one question: why should we attack them at all? Sometimes the most brilliant military victories aren't won on the battlefield. They're won by refusing to step onto it.